Holy shit, this is a tad late to the topic, but better late than never. So we got 2 frames who have recently received the rework treatment, the 2 being Titania and Nyx. All the while Vauban, and by extension Rahatelius, start putting up ceiling ornaments. And if I could just be completely honest here, I'm really not in any position to give my thoughts on these frames. Asking me for my thoughts on the Titania and Nyx changes is kind of like asking me what my favorite part of the Euler's polyhedra formula is. I play these frames so rarely, I probably played them more while getting this footage than I have over the 4,000 hours I have in this game. I think I know more about the mineral composition of Phobos than I do these 2, but that's not to say that I'm not interested in them. Let's start with Space Navi here. No, not that one. Titania. Titania. This frame has literally become a bastard. I can't remember which dev stream it was, so if you know it, link it in the comments and I'll pin it. But the team quite literally said that they regretted creating Titania. Fucking oof. Anywho, it took me a good while to figure out how the hell I'm supposed to play Zephyr but actually able to fly here. She's a weird mishmash of different things. Oh hey, she can crowd control. Oh hey, she can buff and debuff. Oh hey, she can put out damage. Oh hey look, she just liberated that group of settlers for Preston Hart. And yet, despite all of that, something about her just wasn't clicking. She wasn't being as good as what she should be, and frames that can do a little bit of everything are usually pretty damn good in this game. Look at Rhino, for instance. He's a frame with survivability, damage output, buffing potential that extends to his teammates, and he has a solid crowd control. Titania feels like she should be very similar in that regard, though with a lack of survivability. And yes, take potential is kind of a big deal when you're a character in a game all about being shot at by these fucking things. But we know that frames can still be damn good without it. Nova is a good example of this. Nova breaks physically and emotionally if you so much as glance at her the wrong way, but she has held her own for years because her kit is just that good. So what the hell is wrong with Titania? Well, when I went back to her and spent more time playing, I think I found out what was nagging me all this time. Titania isn't a jack of all trades, master of none. She's a step below that. Titania is just under being good for every single one of her traits. Everything is either average or above average at best, and mediocre at worst. Her 1, Spellbind, in terms of function is a good CC, but they gave it a base range of 5 meters. That is just so sad. Alexa, play. Look, I get that they didn't want to make her too good in certain areas. Typically, hybrid frames have their individual strengths lower to compensate for the fact that they can do a little bit of everything. It's why a frame like Loki, who is entirely CC, can hit radial disarm and affect everyone on the map, even through walls, whereas a frame like Excalibur with his radial blind is stunted by walls. It's because Excalibur can do multiple rolls, so his CC is lessened a bit. But when John Oberon Crouch Harrow over here is rocking a 1 power CC with a base range of 20 meters, that's when something seems a tad wrong. And you know, if this was her only problem, that'd be fine. Ivara's sleep arrow is only a single meter larger, but Ivara is very good in other areas. But sadly, that is not the only gripe that I have with the fairy. Her second ability is Tribute, and oh, Tribute. We'll come back to this. Now, her third power, Lantern, would more than make up for her lackluster 1. After all, it has a 20 meter CC radius at base, but it has its own unique problem. Lantern's issue is the opposite of her 1. It has good range, but the CC mechanic itself is, less than ideal, shall we say. Distraction forms of CC are notoriously finicky, and while some frames like Loki can pull it off, Titania, on the other hand, well...
Hello there, may I introduce you to an exciting TV offer? Have you ever wanted your own CC target to vanish into the aether? I have just the product for you. It's called the Mouse 1 button. One press of it and all of your CC will disappear. Why would you want that, you ask? Because don't you want to fulfill this Grenier's dream of going to the damn moon?
Lastly, Razorwing is probably the most balanced thing in her kit. It puts out pretty damn nice damage, easily putting her into the class of a tank buster frame, aka those frames like Chroma, Rhino, and Mirage that all put out super high damage, albeit rather linearly. She's actually pretty decent at Eidolon specifically because of her 4 and the damage it can put out. But the thing is, Titania being a hybrid jack-of-all-trades frame means that she was balanced to keep her floor from being a fantastic damage ability. As mentioned earlier, frames that are hybridized tend to have their individual abilities scaled down in terms of power to compensate, but Titania's problem is that all of her abilities except Razor Wing are below average, whilst Razor Wing's damage is only above average. It's still not super good. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely strong, but you can certainly do a hell of a lot better. So now you know what I think Titania's biggest problem is. She's a step below being a jack of all trades, resulting in her only being moderately effective in almost all areas. So, did the rework solve any of this? Ah! God, this kills me! Titania got almost entirely quality of life changes over actual buffs and improvements. So much so that they actually completely skipped over her one. Oh my god, what a bad note to start on. So, I guess we skip her one and move on to the ability that I said we'd get to later. Tribute. Tribute's entire focus is creating buffs for Titania to pick up and benefit from, but every single buff that she gets suffers from the exact same problem I've been outlining. They're simply average to below average in potency. So here are the 4 buffs with the rework changes already applied. The first is Dust, which now reduces enemy accuracy by 50%. Sounds great, until you realize that this is a game where a single shot from a corrupt shotgunner can turn Titania into fucking ferret cheese faster than you can say. Sure, it's nice that you avoided that bit of damage, but all Dust serves to do is delay the inevitable, not help Titania survive. What Dust should be is a similar mechanic to Revenant's Mesmer skin, where he gets stacks of invulnerability layers. If you've played him, you probably know what I'm talking about. It would also help if the buff is affected by power strength. Just a shame that it's not! Also, for some reason, Dust only reduces the accuracy of enemies within a 30-meter radius around Titania. That radius is not affected by power range either, by the way. Why? Who the fuck knows? Moving on. The second buff is Thorns. If you know anything about how garbage reflected damage is in this game, you probably know why I'm not gonna say anything else about this one. And yes, Thorns doesn't get bonuses from power stat modifications either. The third buff is Entangle, and it slows enemies by 25%. And you know, this could actually be pretty decent. Slowdown powers have been known for their handy side effect. They also slow down the actions of enemies as well, such as their fire rate. Thus, their damage output decreases. You can see a difference in fire speed here with Nova's Molecular Prime. I made this particular demonstration build to slow down enemies by 25% just to match Entangle's percentage. Nova can go much higher and practically freeze enemies in place, but you know. But for some reason, Entangle doesn't do what most other slowdown powers do. That being, enemy actions aren't slowed. Only their movement speed seems to be, and even that might just be a placebo on my end. Why in the ever-loving Lucas Schoonman is Entangle gimped? Oh yeah, and if you were wondering if power strength would boost the debuff's potency, you guessed it! I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's pretty sad to see that the main things that you put onto your builds don't seem to do anything for Titania in a lot of cases. Her last buff is Full Moon, and it's probably the most useful one. It applies a 75% damage buff to all companions in Titania's Razor Wing butterflies. There's just one problem. You're giving a damage buff to Titania's companion. Titania's companion. A companion that cannot benefit from the link mods because Titania's stats are actual garbage. So I mean, the buff is nice, but it'd be much better if that buff went to Titania directly. And yes, the buff is not affected by power mods. Basically, what I'm saying in this section is, buff the buffs! Anyways, Lantern got some love in the rework, notably noting that the enemy's bouncing was kinda counterintuitive to the entire point of the ability. But it still suffers from the same problem. It's still a CC that relies on enemy distraction, and enemies turned into lanterns still get fucking Apollo 11'd out of the map if you, an enemy, or a teammate hits them hard enough. The increased ability to cast it on 4 targets at once is nice, but it doesn't fix the main core problem. Mixing distraction CC and the physics of Saints Row 2's insurance fraud minigame do not make for a good blend. Lastly, Razor Wing got a minor change in that it gained innate vacuum, but that's not really relevant to this video. And to be honest, the Razor Wing is kind of in a good position right now, as is. It's just all her other abilities are holding it back. In closing, play Ivara instead. Next, Nyx is a frame I have always disagreed with how she was designed, so I'm going into this with a clear and obvious pessimistic bias. I just want to put it out there, I'm already not a fan of Nyx. Nyx is big poo-poo. My problem with Nyx is that she does not at all fit the concept of a physics-themed frame in my head. When I think of a frame with psychic powers, I imagine it levitating through the air through sheer force of its brain. I imagine lifting enemies up with your 400 IQ and slamming them into walls and ceilings. I imagine side blades spawning from around the frame and flying off to slice and impale enemies. Not this party streamer shit. Basically, I imagine Nyx being this mind god, a descendant of Ness with incredible PSI powers. What I wasn't expecting was... I'm almost convinced that Nyx was never intended to be a tank-oriented frame. It just kind of happened. She's now this weird mix of CC and tank that, in my opinion, she wasn't really amazing at in the first place and really needed to be changed. Her tank power is clunky and her CC isn't very consistent, which made her a prime candidate for a rework. Now, with my bias out in the open, I will say this. If they reworked Nyx and kept her gameplay style as it is right now, I'd look past that and I would just focus on whether or not they made her current job better. So, did her rework do that? Well, when one of the highlights of the update page was related to audio design, I think it's safe to say that I wasn't exactly optimistic. But I do think that she was handled better than Titania because... Titania, I'm so sorry. So here are Nyx's changes. Her first one was her passive, which has been changed from a chance of disarming a random enemy to decreasing the accuracy of all enemies targeting her. And I think that this is a net positive, even though it does suffer from the same issue as mentioned with Titania. You know, the whole shotgun Swiss cheese thing. But unlike Titania, Nyx has survivability in other areas. So overall, a decent change to her passive. Mind control has always been an issue that all frames with an ability to summon minions have had for ages. They don't do shit! Armor is a notorious value that many enemies have that drastically decrease the damage that they take, and as levels have grown in Warframe over the years, so too have armor values. Meaning that unless you're geared specifically to combat armor, such as having corrosive projection, corrosive, slash, viral and slash, or just trying to brute force the armor by taking advantage of elemental damage bonuses, you are going to have a problem. And mind control was no exception, and it seems like DES figured this out as well. Yeah, no shit. The rework has changed it so that Nyx can pump her control target with damage for 4 seconds after the initial cast, which gives the target an increase to its damage output. The percentage that you can get them to is pretty hefty. With an Arca Titron full charge, I can get anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000% additional damage in some cases, though most of the time I only can hit 1k. I've probably not explored enough options to get it any higher as well. And you know, at this point, I'd be showing footage of the damage that a mind control target can put out, because from mid-level to high mid-levels, they can actually do quite well. There's just one problem. They're not functioning. Like, my minions are just standing around doing nothing. This wasn't happening before. It just, for some reason or another, the game decided to break mind control AI, and most of the time, they just stand there and take damage. Sometimes they'll retaliate to being shot at, but most of the time, they just decide to fuck off. And trust me, their damage at mid to mid-high levels can be pretty damn solid if you know how to properly boost the damage and pick your targets, but I can't freaking show you because they're literally broken for me right now. So, a great rework, I guess? Also, they kinda suck in general because even when the AI is working, it's not too smart, and it also drops off at high levels because, well, armor. Which is what they probably intended for her next ability to handle, but I got my own gripes with that. Psychic Bolts was changed, hallelujah, from an incredibly shitty form of damage to a debuff power. That makes little sense in regards to Nyx's concept, but hey, whatever, this is a game with space sports ball. Basically, enemies hit by psychic bolts now lose a portion of their armor, and if you got an intensify on, you can strip all armor from affected targets. And I actually really like the intent behind this. The idea is that you throw the party streamers into a group affected by chaos and let them murder each other. And for the minimal effort it takes, the damage that they do to each other isn't bad. Up to a certain level, of course. It's clear that Nyx isn't really meant to be a great damage dealer, and from what I'm seeing, the damage that she is capable of putting out is quite gimmicky, for lack of a better word. I mean, sure, you can throw the bolts into a group and wait for them to whittle each other down, or you can just shoot them. But that's not really a gripe of mine. What is, though, is how Psychic Bolt's limit is handled. You can only have 6 bolts affecting enemies at a time, which is already a pain in my urethra in its own right, but what hurts even more is that you have to hold the ability key to get rid of the bolts on any surviving enemies. It'd be so much nicer if Nyx could just press the button and wipe away all the bolts while also reapplying them to different enemies. Is that so much to ask? And lastly, we got Absorb, which, to be honest, I don't have much to say about it. They did change the damage it puts out, going from a magnetic damage blast to putting out whatever damage type it soaks up, but most folk that I know use Absorb primarily for its tanking potential. So this change is honestly just kind of, well, a quality of life change, I think? It's entirely possible that there is more to Absorb than that, but like I said before, Euler's polyhydral formula. In general though, I definitely believe that Nyx got the better end of the stick than Titania. I'm still not satisfied where Nyx is at the moment, simply because I think her psychic concept is heavily slept on. But if you liked Nyx before, I can't imagine the rework doing any damage to how you used to play. Other than making you actually press the 2 button every now and then. Oh, the horror! Now if you'll excuse me, I have to stop Vauban from crying. He's never really been the same since D blue-balled him. Vauban, that was not necessary. Vauban, please stop crying. You don't see Wukong acting like this.